Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for animals. In episode 1, we talked to PETA president and co-founder Ingrid Newkirk about a number of issues, including her stance against misleading no-kill shelters. In episode 2, we talked to PETA General Counsel Jeff Kerr about the connection between animal rights and the fight for civil rights. Check out the links to get to those episodes. This week, we talk about what's called the last great race on Earth. For some dogs, however, the Iditarod is a cruel race to their deaths. Colleen O'Brien, PETA's Vice President of Communications, said 5 dogs died last year, adding to more than 150 deaths in the history of the race. How many will die this year when the race starts on March 3rd? I talked to Colleen about the race, the cruelty, how dogs are treated, and how whistleblowers are coming forward to expose just how the race has evolved from a race of mercy to a race of cruelty. We also talk about the possibility of a better answer, a cruelty-free, dogless Iditarod. Here's my interview with PETA's Colleen O'Brien. You know, the Iditarod, it's coming up. Everyone seems to have a conception about what it is from the movies and legend. Tell me about the actual race. What is it? You know, there's the myth and there's the reality. And what is the reality as far as you're concerned?
Iditarod is a sled dog race in Alaska in which mushers compete for prize money by forcing teams of dogs to run up to 100 miles a day for up to 10 days or more. They run through biting winds, blinding snowstorms, sub-zero temperatures, and treacherous ice.
How many dogs in a pack?
There are 16 dogs in a pack. And the Iditarod states that 5 of those original dogs must cross the finish line. So what that means is that along the trail, dogs are what they call dropped if they are too sick, too injured to continue the race. And of course, the more dogs that are dropped, the more difficult or the more pressure is put on these other dogs to make up for their lost teammates.
So you have 16 dogs, and it becomes a kind of a race of attrition in a way.
Absolutely. And you know, what's really interesting too is that these dogs, they are forced to run, essentially until their bodies break down. While the mushers, we have read books by mushers where they talk about sleeping on the trail. They talk about falling asleep and not knowing for how long they were asleep, waking up in a totally different part of Alaska. So, so much is put onto these dogs to win this race, and it's really about bragging rights and cash and prizes for these mushers, but it's deadly for these dogs.
So it's not about bragging rights for the dogs. I mean, there's no champion, or are there champion dogs? It's really more for the mushers.
It's absolutely for the mushers. No dogs would choose to live in the conditions that these dogs live in and run in the conditions that they run in. So these dogs, they're forced to run with bloody, worn out paws. They get sick on the trail. They pull muscles. They incur stress fractures. They develop pneumonia. More than 150 dogs have died since the Iditarod began. 5 died in just last year's race. And these are only the numbers that are reported. So this isn't counting the dogs who die while they're off the trail, while they're in training, and while they're chained up outside to plastic barrels, which is where most of them spend their time when they're not racing.
I mean, if a dog can die and no one knows about it, one less dog at the 16, that's it?
Well, like last year, for example, 5 dogs died in the race. 1 died of hyperthermia, 1 died after being hit by a car, and the 3 others were raced to death on the trail. The actual Iditarod rules, the rule book actually states that some deaths are unavoidable.
Now, you just say 5 out of how many mushers are there, or how many teams are there? It seems like a small number. doesn't it?
Well, it sure makes a world of difference to those dogs, though. I mean, for every dog who is sick, for every dog who is forced to run with these bloody paws and who dies, it's a pretty big deal to them. And like I said before, these are deaths that are reported. We know that other dogs are dying. Whistleblowers have come forward with photos and videos showing sick and purportedly dying dogs, dogs with diarrhea, dogs who are deprived of veterinary care for gaping neck wounds. And we actually have a lot of these photos and videos on our website at PETA.org. And beyond the cruelty of the actual race itself, these dogs suffer day in and day out when they aren't running. When they're not running, these dogs are chained up outside to plastic barrels. They're forced to live on a small patch of ice or dirt, unable to touch other dogs or do anything but run in circles on this little small patch of land.
So when people think of the Iditarod, they don't see that. I mean, they think of, like I said, the idea of the Iditarod in movies and in legend. How did it start, the Iditarod, and what makes it such a mythic race? I mean, when did it start, and how many years has it been going on for?
This modern Iditarod that we're talking about today started in 1973, but the most famous event in the history of Alaskan mushing took place in 1925. It was known as the Great Race of Mercy. It was a period in time where there was a large diphtheria epidemic that was threatening the city of Nome, and the supply of antitoxins that were needed for the people of Nome had expired, and the nearest antitoxin was in Anchorage, nearly 1,000 miles away. So the only way to get the antitoxin to Nome was by sled dogs, and because planes and ships largely couldn't be used, and they would be too slow. So the governor made arrangements for a cylinder of serum to be sent by train for part of the way from Anchorage to Nome, and then it was passed off to mushers with more than 100 dogs who transferred the antitoxin to Nome for the rest of the way. Now, what's interesting about that was, of course, this was a life-saving mission, and these dogs actually ran in relays. No dog ran over 100 miles.
So, it wasn't like an endurance race. It really was fresh dogs going to fresh dogs. It was a little more humane back in the 20s.
Yeah, and its purpose was, it was not for a trophy, as it is now, or a big payout like it is now. Mm-hmm. All
right, so a race for mercy sounds humanitarian. Then how did it change? How did it get to be this kind of horror that you were describing earlier? How did it change?
Yeah, it has been turned into this just monster of a version of this race in which the trail is used, but it lacks the purpose of the original Iditarod trail. And the participants, almost none of whom are indigenous to Alaska, are motivated by one thing, and that's a cash prize. And they'll do almost anything to attain it, and the dogs are simply tools to help make that happen for them.
How much are we talking about?
Well, in the past, the bank has been upwards of, I think, $1 million.
$1 million? That's a lot.
What's interesting, actually, is that it was announced at the end of last year that the purse for this year's race has been cut by about $250,000, and that's being blamed upon merchandise not selling as well as it did in previous years, and there was also a shortage of sponsorship money, that they didn't receive the sponsorship money that they had hoped for.
Still, that's $800,000 or so, $750,000. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's right. I mean, they're professional mushers, and all they do is go from. I mean, is there like there's a NASCAR circuit? Is there like a mush sled circuit, or is this the only race?
It's not the only race. There are other races. There are races in Norway. There's a race in Norway. A lot of times what these mushers will also do is they will rent out the dogs for like dog sled rides, for people in the area or for visitors, for tourists. So that's another way that they make money off of the dogs.
You have to train your dogs if it's an endurance race. Do some dogs survive training for this kind of thing, or are they all just fresh when they get to the race and then they just die because of the conditions?
I think what a lot of people don't realize is, like I said earlier, these dogs are chained most of their time. Their food intake is limited. They are, I guess, what you would call trained for this, but you can't train a dog to run so far that their bodies break down. I mean, these dogs are pushed beyond their limits. There are absolutely dogs who don't make the cut. There are dogs who die in training. There are dogs who die on the end of a chain and are never used. We got a whistleblower photo of a 3-legged dog who was chained up outside on the property of one of these mushers. That dog's never going to race, but he lives chained up outside. And we have no idea what a large scale these deaths are. Now, there have been whistleblowers who have come forward, including one who came forward and said that as a member of the sled dog community, she's a veteran musher, she came forward and says she knows that hundreds on top of hundreds of dogs have been killed because they don't make the cut.
It's clear then why PETA has taken on this issue, but let me take the devil's advocate stand. I mean, we hear that the dogs love it, that they're bred for it, that they can't wait to get on the trail. And I have friends personally who live in some of the remotest parts of Alaska, and they're talking about their sled dogs, and it's part of the culture. Is there any way that sledding or mushing could be humane? Is there any way to peacefully coexist with PETA?
For a dog who likes to run, great. Let them run. Take them running. But don't force them to run 1,000 miles over a week or 2-week long period until they are sick or dying or their paws are bloody. So that's the first issue. You can't, there's no kind way to do this to a dog. The second issue is the chaining that I mentioned before, the way these dogs are chained up their entire lives. There's no way to have an Iditarod team to have such a large scale number of dogs and do it humanely. And unfortunately, that's why these dogs are chained up outside, because there's so many of them. I mean, it is rows and rows and rows of dogs just chained to plastic barrels outside, because where else are they going to be?
So the dogs have to run how many miles again?
About 1,000 miles through, treacherous wind.
Is it impossible to have a humane kind of sledding, considering the kind of conditions that these dogs have to run through?
As the rules state now, these dogs have to run 1,000 miles, and you have to have a certain number who make it to the end. There's no way to do this humane. I think it's important to keep in mind that anytime animals are used as a money-making tool or a means to make money, inevitably, usually those animals lose out. And the Iditarod's a good example of that, because you cannot force these dogs to run 1,000 miles without them becoming gravely injured, without them hurting themselves. And then aside from that, they spend their lives on a chain just desperate for companionship, desperate for attention, unable to even touch another dog.
What happens to the dogs if they, like after a race, do they, and say they win? I mean, do they become champion dogs? Do people want to breed to these dogs? Or do they eventually just sort of wear out and die from having run such a grueling race?
There's nothing you can give a dog that will make them thankful that they just ran so hard and for so long and in such grueling conditions, until their feet were bloody. There's nothing you can give that dog that would make them thankful for that. These dogs, I think it's interesting to know, these dogs who are running in the Iditarod, they're no different than the dogs that we are sharing our homes with. they experience the same fear and love, and they have the same needs. And I think one of the great lies of the Iditarod community is that somehow these dogs are different from the dogs we share our homes with, but they're not.
And what's the breed that run? What particular kind of dog makes the best kind of Iditarod dog?
The breeds used vary from different kinds of huskies. Largely huskies are used, and I have friends who have huskies, and they are, like all dogs, loving, and they want a family, they want companionship. Sure, they like to run, take them out in your backyard, but don't force them to run 1,000 miles.
So now we can't hear from the dogs, but we can hear from people with a conscience who are in the Iditarod community. And what are they telling you? Because we actually have whistleblowers coming forward. And whenever you have a whistleblower, well, then you know that there is something that other people don't want revealed. And these whistleblowers are revealing it. What are they blowing the whistle on? What are they saying? Hey, look at this, PETA. This is something that is real. What are they saying to you?
There was a whistleblower who came forward to talk about her time working for a very prominent Iditarod musher who she saw what she described as him beating the hell out of one of the dogs. There was another whistleblower who actually was a handler at a kennel owned by Dallas CV, who he and his father, Mitch CV, are considered sort of Iditarod royalty. And this whistleblower came forward and said that handlers at this kennel were picking up dogs by their throats and throwing them to punish them for fighting or not obeying commands. Another whistleblower came forward and said that another very prominent Iditarod musher ignored her concerns about a dog who was older and wasn't eating and was dehydrated, didn't have any bedding, and appeared to have intense abdominal pain. And after reporting this dog's condition for days and insisting that the dog receive veterinary care, she said she watched as this musher put the dog in his truck, drove into the woods with him, and then came back without the dog. Just a few months ago, a veteran musher came forward and revealed that trainers of dogs used to pull sleds, including, again, at Dallas CV's kennel, that they've killed hundreds and hundreds of dogs who didn't make the cut. And actually, just this week, a former handler who worked for an Iditarod musher came forward and told media sources that he had witnessed this musher kill sled dogs in fits of rage.
I mean, what can be done? You can call the authorities on them, maybe get them on animal abuse charges, perhaps. I mean, what is the outcome of a lot of these whistleblower claims? Are they proven to be correct? Are they just baloney? Or does the Iditarod establishment fight you on these? What happened?
PETA has called for an investigation into numerous claims, including those that I just mentioned. And I think, one of the obstacles that we faced was in one of the cities where we called on authorities to investigate, the mayor was a musher. So the outcome, wasn't exactly what we'd hoped. I think what people can do is keep reporting these. If you see any kind of cruelty, report it. Keep reporting it. Don't get discouraged. It's all important. If you have photos or videos, if contact PETA, contact authorities, contact the media, whatever you can do to get this information out there. Another thing people can do is call on sponsors of the Iditarod to stop sponsoring this deadly race. Right now, Jack Daniels is a sponsor, and even after other companies have cut ties with this race, Jack Daniels is still a sponsor of the Iditarod, and so a number of people are have called on them to sever ties and to stop funding dogs running themselves into the ground.
Yeah, but this is sort of like, in the same way that there are these races or, bike races in Europe and in the United States. I mean, people go to the Iditarod to watch it, right? I mean, it's a spectator sport, right?
We ask everyone to never attend the Iditarod or any other dog sled race. And further than that, don't visit any companies that offer dog sled rides. Just don't support the industry, because it's cruel from beginning to end for these dogs. Their lives are miserable from start to finish.
How about the idea that, you have these whistleblowers exposing the bad actors? Is it a matter of just getting rid of the bad actors so that you can have a clean, like I said before, a clean, humane Iditarod? No animals harmed.
Sure.
In this race, in this grueling 1,000-mile race. I mean, is that even possible? But I mean, if they could, I mean, because that would be kind of the defense. Oh, well, that's that guy and that guy, but you get rid of them. Hey, we're just good old-fashioned mushers trying to save the day, right?
Even if the abuse that we are hearing about and the killing that we are hearing about didn't go on, though, the very foundation of the Iditarod race is cruel for these dogs. The fact that they're forced to run 1,000 miles over ice and sub-zero temperatures until, like I said, their feet are bloody and they develop pneumonia and their bodies break down. And then the fact that they're raised on chains, that they spend most of their lives chained up outside, like some old bicycle. It's inherently cruel, and it just simply needs to end.
You have pretty much taken this issue at PETA, and it seems like you are the Iditarod queen in a sense, in terms of trying to, just to shine attention on this, to show people how cruel the race is. Why is it such a passion with you, the Iditarod? And why are you so Iditarod focused, especially now, because the race is about to begin, right? And it's going to last how long?
Yes, the race will last about 2 weeks, short of that, but 10 days or so.
And so why is it a passion for you that this race be stopped?
I was raised with dogs. My fiance and I have 3 dogs. And I think one of the most desperately sad aspects of the Iditarod is how starving for attention these dogs are. They're just desperate for contact and attention. When they're forced to run the race, they're sick and they're in pain, but that's not the only time they suffer. They suffer their entire lives. And I know from knowing my dogs and the dogs, my family has had my whole life, that these are pack animals. They crave attention and family. They like being around other dogs. They like to play. They have unique personalities, and everything that's natural to them is just denied with the Iditarod. And they are so desperately sad, and they need people to say this is not okay and to speak up. If there's anything that they can bring forward to help stop this.
Yeah, has anyone tried to either release some dogs or buy them off the mushers, or somehow get them into homes?
Mm-hmm. There are some rescue groups that will try to find homes for dogs who are no longer considered, a benefit to their team or their musher. But it's not required that these dogs be given to a rescue group. And that's where the killing of so many of the dogs comes in, because it's certainly easier for them to just kill the dogs than it is to do right by them for once in their life.
Do you have instances where that happens, or does it happen all the time? Is it just commonplace, where after a dog is, has run its course and is no longer of value, he's either shot or killed?
Well, there have been sites that have been uncovered where the bodies of dogs have been uncovered. It's something we've known has gone on, and of course I mentioned the whistleblower who came forward recently, who's a member of the mushing community, and said she knows this is happening and she's finally ready to speak out about it. So it's something that we know is going on, but dogs used for the Iditarod don't have the same protections that your dog who you share a home with have. They're considered livestock, and that's for the sole purpose of having more freedom to do more with them than you would be legally allowed to do with a companion animal.
So that usually means that there is some abuse going on.
Absolutely. If they don't even have the same protections that your husky who you share a home with has.
Once again, the Iditarod, this mythic race, when people hear about it, when they see the stories happening, because it's going to start and there are going to be stories about the Iditarod, don't fall for the fantasy?
Absolutely. Please don't fall for the fantasy. Please don't go to races. Don't support them. Tell everyone you know. A lot of people just simply don't know how these dogs are treated and what cruelty is just inherent in the Iditarod. So absolutely, please tell everyone you know. And then also call on sponsors like Jack Daniels to stop paying for dogs to be run to into their graves. And certainly, if anyone ever witnesses abuse, come forward with it.
I don't know if it's on the internet or if people go online, they can see bits of the race. But is it something that you'll be following as the race happens?
PETA and PETA supporters are going to be on the ground in Alaska. We're going to be at the opening checkpoint. At the starting line for the Iditarod, we'll be at the checkpoint, the secondary kind of starting line for it, and we'll be at the end of the race protesting.
Where is that? Where's the starting point, and where's the checkpoint, and where's the finish?
It starts out in Anchorage, and it ends in Nome. That's right. Yeah, and then there's usually a second sort of starting point due to weather and lack of snow original. So we'll be at all three places. We actually have supporters who have huskies who they are bringing out with little signs that say, "Please stop running my friends to death." And we're going to be following the race. Unfortunately, pretty much every year a dog dies in that race, and it just makes me cringe to think about what that number is going to be this year. But we're doing everything we can to help get dogs out of the Iditarod.
All right. Well, for the mushers, this is like the Super Bowl of mushing.
Yeah, but there are a million ways that that this could be done without dogs. We've recommended doing the race with snowmobiles, snow machines. There's always a cruelty-free answer to any issue if you just find it, look for it, use your imagination.
A dogless Iditarod. Now that would be kind of interesting. Maybe with some soy burgers.
Absolutely.
To be dogless. That would be because there's no reason. There's no reason to have a dog in this day and age when you have mechanical sleds. You have, and you're not even trying to. It's not this race for mercy anymore. There's no reason.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you can play more of a role in it. Driving these snowmobiles. It would be a great time for everyone, and all of the people participating would be willing participants. And you wouldn't have PETA out there protesting you.
It sounds like we are so far away from that, or are we? I mean, are there people who actually think that that's a possibility?
Absolutely. We're seeing more and more people who were afraid to talk about the abuse that they saw these dogs in the Iditarod and on their training grounds. We're seeing people who have been so afraid to talk about this come forward now. It's as though, just sort of floodgates have opened. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One is people are tired of hearing that the number of dogs who die in the Iditarod most years. It's whistleblowers who are just, it takes one person to say, "I saw something I can't live with, I need to talk about it." And then it becomes a sort of domino effect when PETA approaches sponsors and and shows them the footage and the videos that we get from whistleblowers of these dogs suffering, and explains to them how they suffer on the trail. They pull their sponsorship, and Costco, Maxwell House, Nestle, Pizza Hut, Rite Aid, they all cut ties with the race years ago. Wells Fargo and State Farm recently ended their sponsorships, and I'm sure that it's one of the reasons that the purse money was cut. And Iditarod organizers themselves admitted that they didn't make the money they were hoping for in selling merchandise. So we're absolutely seeing a shift in, not just a shift in the way people are seeing it, but, people are really actively now speaking out for these dogs. And that's absolutely what's needed.
So Iditarod, not my Iditarod. We're going dogless.
Yes, dogless, absolutely.
Colleen O'Brien, Vice President of Communications at PETA. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Colleen O'Brien, Vice President of Communications for PETA. Can you imagine just how much better a cruelty-free dogless Iditarod could be? And yet the race goes on. For more information on the protests at the Iditarod by PETA, go to PETA.org. And that's our show. Contact us at PETA.org. Our music provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.